When gods who've never known defeat step into a dimension built on endless suffering, even their light begins to rot. The walls hunger, the air screams, and hell doesn't just fight back, it learns. Here, hope is the first thing corrupted, and power becomes the weapon used against you. So what happens when the Justice League discovers a war where even salvation requires someone to burn? The rupture began not with sound but with silence, a terrible, cosmic absence that swallowed the screaming of argent machinery and replaced it with a void so complete that even hell held its breath. The UAC observation platform suspended above Phobos Station registered the anomaly first, its sensors translating the impossible into numbers that made no sense. Negative mass readings, inverted temporal flow, dimensional barriers not merely breached but unwritten from existence. Lillian Voss, archivist 3rd class, watched her monitors fracture into cascading errors as reality itself seemed to reject what was occurring. Through the reinforced glass of the observation deck, she witnessed the fabric of space tear open like rotten cloth, revealing not the familiar crimson hellscape of demonic incursion, but something far worse, a wound in the architecture of the multiverse, bleeding radiant colors that had no names in human language. The tear widened with geological inevitability, each second stretching wider until it dominated the viewport entirely. Through its center poured not demons but light, clean, golden, utterly incompatible with the blood-soaked physics of this dimension. Lillian's monitoring equipment exploded in sequence, screens shattering as they attempted to process energies that operated on fundamentally different principles than Argent technology. The platform shuddered. Alarms that had remained dormant through countless demonic incursions suddenly screamed to life, their pitch climbing toward frequencies that suggested genuine terror rather than mechanical response. She gripped her console as gravity itself seemed to forget its purpose, her stomach lurching as localized physics became optional rather than absolute. Then they came through. 7 figures materialized within the rupture's corona, silhouetted against impossible radiance. They moved with the fluid certainty of beings accustomed to defying natural law, their forms initially obscured by the dimensional transition. As they crossed the threshold into Doom's reality, the universe recoiled. Argent energy throughout the facility spiked and crashed in rhythmic waves, as if the very foundation of Hell's power structure was attempting to parse these newcomers and finding its categories inadequate. The lead figure, a man suspended in defiance of the station's artificial gravity, wore primary colors so bright they seemed to burn against the rust and gore that decorated every surface of the UAC installation. Behind him came others, a woman whose very presence seemed to command the debris-filled air into organized patterns, a scarlet-clad streak that existed in multiple positions simultaneously. A massive figure whose silhouette suggested immovable geology given human form. The Justice League had arrived in Hell. Lillian watched, frozen, as Superman's boots touched down on the observation platform's outer walkway. The metal beneath his feet warped slightly, as though reality was struggling to accommodate his mass, his presence, the sheer weight of his existence within a universe governed by different fundamental forces. His cape settled around him in a motion too perfect, too clean for this blood-stained dimension. His eyes swept the facility with the methodical assessment of someone accustomed to analyzing threats, but Lillian could see the micro-expression that crossed his face, confusion transitioning rapidly toward concern. This was not the Earth he knew. The air itself was wrong. Too thick with ash particulate, too saturated with the copper-iron taste of industrial death, too heavy with the electromagnetic screaming of Argent containment systems pushed past their theoretical limits. Wonder Woman landed beside him with ancient grace, her warrior's instincts immediately cataloging angles of attack and vectors of retreat. The lasso of truth at her hip pulsed with golden light that seemed somehow dimmer here, as though the fundamental concept of truth itself operated differently in a dimension where corruption was the natural state of being. Behind them, Batman's arrival was silent, despite the chaos, a darker shadow among countless shadows, his cowl turning slowly to absorb every detail of their surroundings, with the paranoid efficiency that had kept him alive through impossible odds. The Flash vibrated into solidity, his molecules stabilizing from quantum uncertainty, But Lillian noticed immediately that his aura, the Speed Force corona that should have surrounded him with electric vitality, flickered and sputtered like a candle in a hurricane. Green Lantern constructed a protective barrier on pure reflex, emerald energy crystallizing into geometric perfection. The construct held for precisely 3 seconds before hairline fractures appeared in its structure, spreading with alarming speed. Lillian understood what she was witnessing. Willpower, filtered through the emotional spectrum, was encountering a dimension where will meant nothing against the grinding certainty of Hell's existence. The construct shattered into fragments of fading light. Hal Jordan stared at his ring with an expression Lillian had never seen on any superhero's face before the dawning realization that his power, his certainty, his very identity might be meaningless here. Cyborg systems immediately began screaming alarms. His technological components, hybrid human-alien divine machinery that should have been beyond any known interference, started experiencing cascading failures as they attempted to interface with a network architecture built on principles of torment and consumption rather than logic and connection. His right arm cycled through transformation sequences without his command, his optical implants showing him readouts in demonic script that his processors couldn't translate. Aquaman gripped his trident with both hands, the ancient Atlantean weapon humming with power that suddenly seemed small and provincial compared to the cosmic weight pressing down on all of them. The silence broke. Not with words, but with a sound that Lillian had heard too many times during her tenure at the UAC, the howl of hell recognizing prey. Deep within the facility's lower levels, something ancient stirred. The argent accumulators that powered the station's defensive grids suddenly reversed their flow, energy draining downward into the planet's corrupted core rather than upward into the storage matrices. Temperature sensors throughout the complex spiked simultaneously, recording heat increases that suggested the local geology was preparing to transition from solid to plasma states. The hell barrier, that invisible membrane that separated the mortal facility from the infernal dimension bleeding through beneath it, began to thin with purposeful malevolence. Demons poured through every vent, every corridor, every crack in reality's armor. But these were not the mindless horrors that usually constituted Hell's foot soldiers. These entities moved with directed intelligence, their forms already adapting, evolving, reshaping themselves to counter the specific threat represented by these 7 impossibilities that had invaded Hell's domain. Lillian watched in mounting horror as possessed soldiers emerged from the maintenance tunnels, but their flesh was wrong, covered in crystalline growths that refracted light into spectrum patterns that matched the dimensional signature of the rupture itself. They were changing, adapting, becoming antibodies designed to reject the DC Universe's metaphysical intrusion. Superman moved first, crossing the distance to the nearest pack of demons with speed that left sonic booms in his wake. His fist connected with an imp's chitinous skull, delivering force sufficient to pulverize reinforced concrete. The demon's head snapped back, but did not explode, did not shatter, did not die. Instead, it absorbed the impact, its flesh rippling as though learning, cataloging, understanding the nature of Kryptonian strength. When it counterattacked, its claws left shallow wounds across Superman's invulnerable skin, wounds that should have been impossible, wounds that blazed with hellfire that burned without oxygen, without fuel, without any of the limitations that natural fire respected. Wonder Woman's blade sang through the air, its edge honed by divine craftsmanship that predated human civilization. It carved through demon flesh with the grace of countless millennia of warrior culture refined into a single cutting motion. Ichor sprayed across the platform, hissing where it touched metal, leaving corrosion patterns that formed almost legible symbols in demonic script. But for every demon she struck down, 3 more clambered over the corpses, their eyes glowing with focused hatred rather than mindless hunger. They circled her like wolves, probing for weaknesses, testing her responses, learning the rhythm of her combat style with accelerated adaptation that suggested something was coordinating their assault. The Flash attempted to use his speed to become the untouchable blur that had saved his reality countless times before. But the Speed Force itself seemed to struggle here, fighting against dimensional physics that treated velocity as just another resource to be consumed and corrupted. Barry Allen pushed himself to Mach-level velocity, only to discover that demons were already compensating, not matching his speed, but predicting his positions, existing in multiple temporal states simultaneously through Hell's casual violation of causality. Claws raked across his costume, drawing blood. The impossible had occurred. Something had tagged the fastest man alive. Batman's explosive batarangs detonated with precision, each one calculated to create maximum disruption with minimum collateral damage. The demons stumbled, wounded, but did not fall. They pressed forward through chemical fire and concussive force with the implacable certainty of tide rising against sandcastles. Bruce Wayne's mind raced through contingency plans, tactical assessments, strategic repositioning options, and came up empty. This was not a problem he could solve with preparation and resources. This was something fundamental, existential, a war fought on levels where human determination meant nothing against cosmic indifference. Green Lantern poured more willpower into his constructs, forcing them into existence through sheer, stubborn refusal to acknowledge their instability. Giant fists materialized and swung with battering ram force, each impact driving demons back, buying seconds of breathing room. But with each construct formed, Hal Jordan felt something draining from him that had nothing to do with the ring's charge. This reality was hungry for his certainty, his confidence, his belief that will alone could reshape existence. Every construct was a feast for Hell's corruption, every exercise of power a deposit into a bank that would never return his investment. Cyborg tried desperately to interface with the facility's systems, to shut down whatever was bringing the demons through in endless waves. His consciousness dove into the UAC network and immediately recoiled, screaming digital agony. The network was alive not with artificial intelligence but with something that had once been alive, had been rendered down into pure suffering, and had been converted into computational substrate. Every byte of data carried the psychic imprint of torment. Every protocol was designed not just to function, but to inflict existential pain on any consciousness foolish enough to touch it. Victor Stone's scream was both digital and human as he severed the connection, his systems temporarily crashing as they attempted to purge the contamination. Aquaman's trident channeled the ocean's wrath, calling upon powers that connected him to every drop of water across every dimension. But the moisture in this facility was wrong, saturated with dissolved demonic matter, carrying within its molecular structure the psychic residue of countless deaths. The water that answered his call came forth reluctantly, as though ashamed of what it had become, and when it struck the demons it seemed more to join them than harm them, flowing across chitinous armor like liquid seeking reunion with its corrupted kin. Lillian Voss remained frozen at her console, her archivist's training screaming at her to document, record, preserve even as every survival instinct demanded she flee. Her hands moved almost automatically, her fingers activating backup recording systems that began logging every sensor reading, every energy signature, every impossible data point that this encounter generated. Some part of her understood that this would be important, that future analysts would need to understand what had happened when two incompatible realities collided. Another part of her wondered whether there would be any future analysts, whether the universe itself would survive the contradiction currently unfolding before her eyes. The demons pressed their advantage with strategic precision that suggested coordination from a higher intelligence. They didn't simply attack, they tested, each wave probing different combinations of powers, measuring response times, cataloging weaknesses. An imp threw itself directly into one of Green Lantern's constructs, its body disintegrating on impact, but in its death throes it released a burst of something that looked like corrupted emotional spectrum energy. Where it touched Hal's constructs, they began to turn from emerald to a sickly amber, their geometric perfection decaying into fractal chaos. Superman caught a Hell Knight's punch, a blow that would have reduced a mountain to gravel, and for a moment held the demon at bay through sheer physical superiority. Then the Hell Knight's flesh began to change, muscles restructuring themselves into configurations that defied anatomical logic but generated leverage that even Kryptonian strength struggled to counter. Clark Kent felt himself being slowly driven backward, his feet carving trenches in the platform's reinforced deck plating. The The demon's eyes glowed with satisfaction that transcended simple bloodlust. This was the joy of entropy, proven superior to order, of corruption demonstrated stronger than purity. Wonder Woman moved to assist, her shield raised to intercept the second Hell Knight, converging on Superman's position. The demon's fist struck her shield with enough force to create a shockwave that shattered every viewport in the observation deck. Diana's arm went numb from shoulder to fingertips, the enchanted shield's magic struggling to process impact physics that operated outside the rules established by the Greek pantheon. These demons had never heard of Zeus, owed no metaphysical respect to Olympus, and their attacks carried the weight of a cosmos that had never known gods, only the grinding certainty of eternal torment. The Flash ran circles around a cluster of Posiste, moving at velocities that should have rendered him invisible, untouchable. But the demons tracked him with their eyes impossible, yet undeniable. They fired their plasma weapons not where he was, but where he would be, their predictions somehow accounting for speed force dynamics they should have had no context for. Barry Allen wove between projectiles with microsecond precision, but each dodge felt harder, as though the dimension itself was learning to slow him down, to make velocity itself a weapon against him. One plasma bolt grazed his shoulder, its energy not burning but feeding on his connection to the speed force, draining vitality in ways that violated conservation of energy. Batman deployed every gadget in his arsenal, his movements economical despite the chaos, each action serving multiple tactical purposes. Smoke grenades created concealment while delivering chemical agents designed to disrupt demonic respiration. Electrical discharge weapons overloaded nervous systems while generating EMP effects to interfere with Helltech. But the demons adapted faster than his contingencies could account for. They developed filtration organs in real time to handle his toxins. They grounded themselves against his electricity. They learned. Cyborg struggled to maintain system stability, his consciousness flickering between human terror and machine logic. His threat assessment subroutines had locked into failure loops, unable to generate survival probabilities above single-digit percentages. His weapon systems cycled through every configuration in his arsenal plasma cannon. Sonic disruptor, micro-missile pods, each one devastating against ordinary threats, each one merely inconvenient against demons that could metabolize energy weapons as sustenance and armor themselves against kinetic impacts through rapid cellular restructuring. The platform shuddered again, more violently this time. Lillian's remaining functional monitor showed something horrifying. The dimensional rupture was growing, expanding in pulsing waves that suggested respiration. The DC universe wasn't simply bleeding through anymore. It was being consumed, digested, integrated into Hell's metaphysical structure. She could see energy readings that indicated mass-scale conversion processes occurring at the rupture's edges, where the golden light of the Justice League's home reality met the crimson corruption of this dimension. Matter from their universe was being broken down into raw argent energy, feeding Hell's insatiable appetite. Superman's hearing, capable of detecting heartbeats across continents, suddenly registered something that made his blood run cold. Beneath the platform, deep in the facility's bowels, something massive was ascending, not moving through corridors but through the facility itself, phasing partially out of phase with material reality as it rose. The sound it made was not footsteps, but the grinding of tectonic plates given malevolent purpose. Hell's hierarchy had taken notice of the intruders, and it was dispatching something worthy of their threat level. The ceiling above them exploded inward, not from physical impact but from spatial distortion. A summoner materialized amidst the debris, its robes woven from what looked like condensed darkness given textile properties. Its skeletal hands moved in patterns that hurt to perceive, tracing sigils in the air that remained burning after the gestures completed. Reality buckled around each symbol, and from those wounds in space emerged something new, demons that bore unsettling similarities to the Justice League themselves. The first was a mockery of Superman chitinous armor in primary colors, eyes blazing with red heat that burned with Hell's hunger rather than solar radiation, a cape of flayed flesh that still somehow maintained the iconic drape. It moved with Kryptonian speed, but wrong, its acceleration accompanied by the screams of damned souls rather than sonic booms. When it spoke, its voice was Clark Kent's voice run through filters of torment and malice. "False god," it said, each word dripping with concentrated corruption. "Your hope dies here." The demon Superman launched itself at the genuine article with velocity that matched, perhaps exceeded, what Clark Kent could generate within this dimension. They collided mid-air, the impact releasing an expanding sphere of destruction that vaporized every demon within 50 meters and sent the Justice League sprawling. Superman and his corrupted reflection grappled, trading blows at supersonic speeds, each impact generating pressure waves that threatened to tear the facility apart. But where Superman's strikes carried the clean power of solar radiation, his demonic counterpart's attacks burned with something worse. The concentrated despair of civilizations that had watched their sun devoured by hell, their hope converted into fuel for eternal suffering. The summoner's hands moved again, and a second demon emerged, this one shaped in Wonder Woman's image. But where Diana carried herself with warrior nobility, her reflection embodied only slaughter. Its armor was Amazonian in design, but crafted from demon bone and bound with sinew that still twitched with residual life. The lasso of truth hung from its waist, except the golden cord was now red with dried blood, and instead of compelling honesty, it extracted confessions through agony. The demon Amazon moved with Diana's grace, but none of her restraint, its every motion promising brutality without honor, strength without purpose beyond destruction. More followed. A demon wearing the Flash's costume, except its speed wasn't borrowed from the Speed Force but generated through temporal violation. It moved fast by stealing time from its surroundings, leaving entropy and decay in its wake. A demon in Green Lantern's uniform, its ring generating constructs not from willpower but from concentrated terror, creating shapes that induced psychological collapse in anyone who perceived them. A creature that mimicked Batman's silhouette but radiated an aura of predatory inevitability that suggested the logical endpoint of Gotham's darkness given form without the human heart that had kept Bruce Wayne from becoming the monsters he fought. Lillian understood with horrible clarity what she was witnessing. Hell wasn't simply attacking the Justice League, it was showing them who they were, stripping away context and morality and noble purpose until only the raw power remained, power that looked indistinguishable from demonic might when divorced from the values that had once given it meaning. This was psychological warfare on a cosmic scale, designed not merely to defeat the heroes but to corrupt the very concepts they represented. Wonder Woman engaged her demonic double with precise strikes that had been honed across centuries of combat. Her blade found gaps in the armor, drew ichor with every pass, but her reflection fought without anything resembling Amazon discipline. It attacked with berserker fury that seemed almost celebratory, as though it had been waiting eons to be freed from the restraints of honor and could finally express pure destruction without guilt. Diana's defensive stance, designed to protect and counter, found itself inadequate against an opponent who embraced damage as eagerly as it inflicted it. The Flash and his temporal vampire counterpart became blurs across the battlefield, their combat existing in accelerated timeframes that made them invisible to normal perception. But Barry Allen could feel it each time their speeds intersected. His connection to the Speed Force weakened slightly. The demon was learning to drink from the same source, or worse, teaching Hell how to corrupt the Speed Force itself. If that happened, if Hell gained access to temporal manipulation on a universal scale, reality across every dimension would become negotiable, changeable, subject to revision according to demonic whim. Green Lantern's constructs clashed with his corrupted counterpart's terror forms, Emerald Will against Crimson Fear. But Hal Jordan was fighting a losing battle because fear required no justification, no cause, no purpose beyond its own existence. Will demanded reason, required focus, needed something to will toward. In Hell's domain, where suffering was the default state and hope a foreign contaminant, fear had home field advantage. Each collision drained Hal's reserves faster while seeming to strengthen his opponent, feeding it psychological ammunition for even more horrifying constructs. Batman faced his shadow self with calculating detachment, analyzing its attack patterns, searching for exploitable weaknesses. but his analytical mind kept arriving at the same conclusion. The demon was using his tactics, his strategies, his understanding of how to maximize fear as a weapon. Every contingency he deployed, his counterpart already had a counter-contingency prepared. They circled each other in deadly silence, two tacticians locked in a chess match where every move had been predicted 15 layers deep, where victory might be impossible because they were too fundamentally similar. Cyborg tried to maintain battlefield awareness, to coordinate the team despite the chaos, but his systems were failing faster now. The corrupted network had left Trojans in his consciousness, malicious code designed to whisper doubt, to show him simulations where every action led to failure, where his technological superiority meant nothing against foes who could adapt faster than he could innovate. His left eye cycled through threat assessments that all ended the same way, probability of survival approaching 0. Aquaman held the line against waves of lesser demons, his trident working in continuous arcs that kept the tide barely at bay. But he could feel his strength ebbing, not from physical exhaustion but from something deeper. This dimension had no oceans, no pure water, no connection to the primal forces that gave him purpose and power. He was a king of seas that didn't exist here, drawing on reserves that had no source to replenish them. Every thrust of his weapon was slower than the last, every defensive stance less stable. He was drowning in air, suffocating in a reality that had no place for what he represented. Superman broke away from his demonic double, blood streaming from a dozen wounds that should have been impossible to inflict, that were impossible by every physical law he understood. He flew to Diana's side, his heat vision carving through demons with solar fury, buying her seconds to reposition. Their eyes met two godlike beings confronting the horrifying truth that their godhood meant nothing here, that they were not invincible legends but merely powerful refugees in a cosmos that found their power unimpressive. "We can't win this," Diana said, her voice carrying the weight of ancient warrior wisdom forced to acknowledge inevitable defeat. "This dimension is designed to corrupt everything we are." "Then we don't fight to win," Clark replied, his jaw set in that familiar stubborn line that had carried him through countless impossible situations. "We fight to survive long enough to find another way." But even as he spoke those words, he could feel doubt gnawing at his certainty. What other way could there be? They were trapped in Hell's domain, fighting manifestations of their own power, twisted into demonic form, while reality itself seemed determined to reject their existence. The dimensional rupture continued to expand, its edges now consuming not just the facility, but the surrounding hellscape, converting everything into raw, chaotic energy that served neither reality fully. A bastard hybrid space where the physics of both universes competed for dominance and created only instability. The summoner raised its skeletal hands again, preparing another invocation. Lillian's failing instruments registered energy spikes that suggested it was reaching across dimensional barriers, calling something from a different stratum of Hell's infinite hierarchy. The demonic script burning in the air above it grew more complex, more layered, building towards some kind of crescendo that would either destroy the facility entirely or fundamentally alter the rules of engagement in ways that would doom the Justice League completely. Batman's hand went to his belt, fingers brushing across explosives powerful enough to level city blocks. He calculated trajectories, blast radii, collateral damage probabilities. If he could disrupt the summoning, destroy the summoner before it completed the invocation, maybe, just maybe, they could buy enough time to analyze the situation, to formulate an actual escape plan, rather than simply postponing the inevitable. But his tactical mind kept arriving at the same conclusion. Even if he succeeded, Hell had infinite demons, infinite horrors to throw at them. They were fighting entropy itself, and entropy always won eventually. The platform beneath them began to liquefy, the metal losing coherence as Hell's corruption ate through molecular bonds. The Justice League found themselves standing on increasingly unstable ground, literally and metaphorically. Demons pressed in from every angle, an ocean of chitin and hate, threatening to drown them through sheer numbers. The air itself grew thick with sulfurous heat that made breathing an exercise in determination. Then she spoke. Lillian Voss, Archivist 3rd Class, her voice amplified through the facility's damaged PA system, cutting through the chaos with words that should have been meaningless amid apocalyptic battle, but somehow carried weight beyond their simple meaning. "There is one who walks these halls, whom even hell fears." The demons paused. Not halted, not stopped, but paused a fraction of a second's hesitation that rippled through their ranks like a stone thrown into still water. The summoner's hands froze mid-gesture, its eyeless skull turning slowly toward the observation deck where Lillian stood, her finger still pressed on the communication panel, her entire body trembling, but her voice steady with the conviction of someone who had spent years studying forbidden lore and finally understood its purpose. "The Slayer," she continued, each word carefully chosen from months of reading incident reports, survivor testimonies, demonic communications intercepted and translated by UAC xenolinguists. "The Doom Marine, the Unchained Predator, the Hellwalker, he whose rage is eternal, whose purpose is singular, who has torn through your armies since before this universe knew corruption." Superman's enhanced hearing detected something in the facility's lower levels, a sound like a door being kicked open with enough force to buckle reinforced bulkheads. Then another door, then a series of impacts that suggested rapid progress upward, each one growing louder, closer, accompanied by sounds that made the demons' howls seem like whispered prayers. The demons knew that sound. Every fiber of their existence recognized it on an instinctive level that transcended consciousness. It was the sound of their ending approaching with mechanical inevitability, the acoustic signature of a force that had been killing them for eons and would continue killing them until hell itself crumbled into dust. The infernal hierarchy had spent countless cycles attempting to develop countermeasures, breeding specialized demons, crafting weapons specifically designed to destroy him. All had failed. The Slayer did not slow, did not stop, did not ever show mercy or hesitation or anything resembling doubt. He simply killed. The barrier between the lower facility and the observation level exploded outward, not opened, but erased through excessive application of force. Through the smoking aperture stepped a figure that seemed almost disappointingly human-scaled compared to the cosmic horror that surrounded them. His armor was green and brown, battle-scarred and functional, lacking any aesthetic consideration beyond brutal efficiency. In his hands, he carried a shotgun that looked almost crude compared to the UAC's advanced weaponry. Yet somehow, the weapon radiated menace that made the facility's argent arsenal seem like toys. The Doom Slayer surveyed the battlefield with eyes that held no expression beyond implacable focus. He didn't appear surprised by the Justice League's presence, didn't seem concerned with the dimensional rupture or the metaphysical impossibility of their situation. His attention fixed on the demons with the single-minded concentration of a craftsman evaluating materials for a familiar task. Then he moved. The Slayer closed the distance to the nearest demon in a burst of speed that rivaled the Flash's, his shotgun discharging with a roar that sounded less like a weapon firing and more like reality itself rejecting the demon's existence. The creature exploded into component pieces, its death so absolute that its ichor evaporated before hitting the ground. The Slayer's momentum carried him into 3 more demons, his movements a masterclass in brutal efficiency, no wasted motion, no unnecessary flourishes, just relentless application of violence refined into an art form more perfect than anything the Justice League had witnessed. Superman watched, transfixed, as the Slayer grabbed an imp's skull with one armored gauntlet and drove it downward with enough force to pulp the demon's entire upper torso. The creature didn't have time to scream before it was reduced to biological debris. Another demon lunged from behind the Slayer's elbow, caught it mid-air, the impact audible as shattering stone. Then his shotgun swung up and fired point-blank into the stunned creature's center mass. The demon's body folded around the impact and was launched backward to collide with 5 others, the kinetic energy transfer reducing all 6 to pulverized meat. Wonder Woman recognized what she was witnessing, not simply combat, but something approaching religious experience. The Slayer fought with the precision of her Amazon sisters, but amplified to levels that suggested either divine intervention or millennia of refinement. Every punch carried the weight of absolute conviction. Every shot was placed with geometric perfection to maximize lethality. He moved through demon formations like a scalpel through diseased tissue, his path always forward, always toward the next target, the next kill, the next small victory in an eternal war he had committed to fighting until existence itself ended. The Flash saw the Slayer's combat rhythm and felt something approaching awe. The man wasn't simply fast, he was efficient in ways that transcended speed. He existed in the space between enemy attacks, his positioning perfect to create angles where demons' own bodies blocked their allies' fire, where every step forward put him behind cover provided by enemy corpses. He was a bullet moving through Hell's forces, following a ballistic trajectory that had been calculated to intersect with maximum destruction. Batman's analytical mind catalogued every technique, every tactical decision, every micro-adjustment the Slayer made in response to changing battlefield conditions. This was mastery beyond what any human should be capable of, beyond what most metahumans achieved. The man fought like he had been doing nothing but fighting for longer than civilizations endured, as though combat had become so fundamental to his existence that strategy and instinct had merged into a single, optimized killing process. Bruce Wayne realized with uncomfortable certainty that he was watching the logical endpoint of what he could have become if he had ever lost sight of justice and allowed himself to become nothing but the mission. The demon Superman charged the Slayer with hell-enhanced Kryptonian speed. The Slayer didn't dodge, he countered, his timing so perfect that he seemed to know the demon's trajectory before it moved. His shotgun fired directly into the creature's face at a range measured in inches, the blast channeled by the barrel into a focused cone of destruction that punched through corrupted invulnerability through sheer concentration of force. The demon Superman's head snapped back, chunks of infernal flesh blown away to reveal skull plates that steamed and cracked. Before it could recover, the Slayer had already moved to his next target. A rocket launcher materialized from his equipment, seemingly from nowhere, the Slayer's armor interfacing with dimensional storage that operated on principles the UAC had never fully understood. He fired 3 rockets in rapid succession, each one spiraling toward a different demon reflection of the Justice League. The projectiles didn't just explode, they annihilated, their warheads carrying concentrated argent energy configured for maximum destruction of infernal tissue. The demon Wonder Woman raised its corrupted lasso to defend, but the Slayer's rocket passed through the weapon's energy field without slowing, as though it existed on a metaphysical layer where demonic magic simply didn't matter. The explosion carved away half the creature's torso, leaving it stumbling, vulnerable. The Slayer closed distance, produced a chainsaw whose blade screamed with motorized fury, and bisected the demon from shoulder to hip in a spray of gore so violent it painted the walls crimson. Green Lantern watched, his ring hand trembling, as the Slayer dismantled his demonic counterpart through application of sustained plasma fire, followed by a melee attack that involved grabbing the demon's head and simply pulling until the entire spinal column came away with the skull. There was no hesitation, no moment of mercy, no consideration given to whether these demons might be sentient enough to plead or negotiate. The Slayer simply killed, his purpose as absolute as gravity, as inevitable as entropy. The summoner realized its mistake too late. It had been so focused on the Justice League that it had forgotten the primary rule of survival in Hell's domain: never, under any circumstances, attract the Slayer's attention. Now, those pitiless eyes fixed on it, and the skeletal demon felt something it hadn't experienced in millennia, genuine existential terror. It attempted to teleport, to escape through dimensional folding that should have been instantaneous. The Slayer produced a weapon that looked like a fusion of technological precision and demonic corruption, the ballista, its frame built from Hell technology reverse-engineered and turned against its creators. The weapon discharged with a sound like reality tearing, and the bolt of concentrated argent energy caught the summoner mid-teleport, disrupting the dimensional fold and forcing the demon back into material existence. It stumbled, its spellwork collapsing, the demonic reflections it had summoned losing coherence as their master's concentration shattered. The Slayer walked toward the summoner with measured steps, his shotgun held ready but not firing. This kill deserved to be personal. The demon attempted another spell, its skeletal hands tracing symbols of binding and banishment used by Hell's hierarchy to control lesser entities. The symbols burned bright, then faded, their power meaningless against armor that had been blessed by seraphim, against a warrior who existed partially outside the standard hierarchy of divine and infernal authority. He grabbed the summoner's skull with both hands. The demon's robes writhed, revealing a body that was mostly shadow given semi-physical form, but the Slayer's grip found purchase on something fundamental enough to constitute existence. He began to pull, not quickly but with steady, implacable force. The summoner's silent scream was felt rather than heard, a psychic wave of terror and agony that made every conscious being in the facility recoil. Bone cracked, shadow tore. The demon came apart in the Slayer's hands like wet paper, its essence fragmenting into dissipating darkness. The Slayer dropped the remains and turned to face the Justice League. For the first time since entering the chamber, he seemed to fully acknowledge their presence. His helmet concealed his expression, but the League could feel the weight of his regard, not hostile but not friendly either, assessing, measuring, determining whether they were threat, liability, or potential asset. Superman floated forward slowly, hands raised in a gesture of peace that felt absurdly inadequate given the butchery they had just witnessed. "We're not your enemies," he said, his voice carrying the authority that had convinced countless beings to stand down from conflict. "We're from another dimension, brought here accidentally. We don't want to fight you." The Slayer said nothing. His silence carried its own eloquence, a statement that he had heard every possible plea, justification, and negotiation across his eternal crusade, and found all of them irrelevant to his purpose. He fought demons. These were not demons. Therefore, they were not his concern, not unless they interfered with his mission. His head tilted slightly, attention shifting to the dimensional rupture still pulsing with unstable energy. Lillian's voice crackled through the PA again. Steadier now. "The dimensional breach is accelerating. My instruments are detecting cascade failure across 12 Argent containment matrices. If it continues, the facility will experience total metaphysical collapse within 90 minutes. The rupture will expand to consume Mars, then continue outward until both universes fragment." Wonder Woman stepped forward, her diplomat's instincts engaging despite the surreal horror of their situation. "We need to seal the rupture. Our presence here is causing instability we're incompatible with this dimension's physics. If we can find a way back to our universe, the breach should stabilize." The Slayer's attention swung to her, and Diana felt the full weight of that gaze, ancient, implacable, carrying within it the accumulated trauma of witnessing the death of his universe, the extinction of his people, the corruption of everything he had once held sacred. She understood suddenly that this man had no universe to return to, that his only home was the eternal battlefield, and that attempting to reason with him using concepts like dimensional integrity or universal stability was futile. He understood only one thing: killing demons until there were no more demons to kill. But then his posture shifted slightly, a subtle change that suggested consideration rather than dismissal. He walked to the edge of the platform and looked down into the facility's depths, where the rupture's light was brightest. His hands moved across his armor's interface, accessing information that the UX systems had been collecting. Data streamed across his helmet's HUD, dimensional resonance frequencies, exotic energy readings, temporal distortion coefficients. Batman approached cautiously, his cowl's lenses recording every detail of the Slayer's equipment. "You have access to the facility's systems. Can you help us understand what we're dealing with?" The Slayer's hand moved, and suddenly a holographic projection sprang to life, between them a representation of the dimensional rupture rendered in alarming detail. The image showed not just the physical tear but the metaphysical damage it was causing. The DC universe and the Doom dimension were grinding against each other like tectonic plates, each one trying to assert its fundamental laws as dominant. The friction was generating exotic particles that threatened to cascade into a quantum apocalypse that would sterilize both realities. Green Lantern studied the projection with growing dread. The emotional spectrum energies from our universe are interacting with the Argent containment fields. It's creating a feedback loop, Our power is being corrupted and converted into more argent energy, which is strengthening Hell's dimensional anchor, which is pulling more of our universe through the breach. Then we need to stop using our powers, the Flash said, his voice carrying the manic edge that always emerged when he was thinking at accelerated speeds. If our energy is feeding the process, we shut down, go dormant, until we can figure out a solution that doesn't involve making things worse. And defend ourselves how? Cyborg challenged, his synthesized voice raw with suppressed panic. The demons aren't going to stop attacking just because we decide to power down. We're barely holding our own at full capacity. The Slayer's head turned toward Cyborg, regarding him with what might have been curiosity. He reached out and tapped the younger man's technological components with one armored finger, a gesture so casual it was almost insulting. But in that moment of contact, Victor Stone felt his systems stabilize. The corrupted code that had been eating through his consciousness suddenly quarantined and deleted by firewalls he hadn't installed. The Slayer had interfaced with his systems and cleaned them in the span of a second, demonstrating technical expertise that suggested intimate familiarity with hell-corrupted technology. Aquaman, bloodied and exhausted, spoke the question they were all thinking. "Can you get us home?" The Slayer stood motionless for several seconds, an eternity in combat time, a blink in cosmic scales. Then he nodded once, a sharp downward jerk of his helmet that conveyed certainty without elaboration. He turned and began walking toward the facility's lower levels, his expectation clear: follow or don't, but he was moving forward with or without their cooperation. Superman exchanged glances with his teammates. They were in enemy territory, weakened by dimensional incompatibility, hunted by demons that adapted to counter their every strength, and their only potential ally was a silent warrior whose methods made them all deeply uncomfortable. But the alternative was remaining in this hellscape, fighting until exhaustion claimed them, until they were worn down and corrupted and transformed into the very monsters they fought against. "We follow," Diana decided, her voice carrying the authority of millennia of tactical experience. "But we stay alert. He's helped us for now, but we don't know his motivations or what he might expect in return." They moved as a group, the Justice League forming a protective formation around Lillian Voss, who had abandoned her observation post to join them. The Archivist's practical survival instinct, recognizing that remaining behind meant death. The Slayer led them through corridors that bore the scars of his previous passages, bulkheads torn open, blast patterns covering every surface, demon corpses stacked like cordwood in corners where he had apparently paused to reload. The deeper they descended, the worse the corruption became. The facility's walls wept something that looked like oil but moved with purposeful malevolence, reaching toward them with pseudopods that recoiled from the Slayer's presence. The air grew thick enough to be nearly solid, each breath requiring conscious effort, as though they were descending through water that had forgotten how to be liquid. Reality itself was sick here, infected by prolonged exposure to dimensional bleeding that had lasted too long, gone too deep. They passed through a chamber where UAC technicians had attempted to establish an argent refinery, their corpses still present, frozen in the moment of transformation as Hell's corruption had seized them. The twisted bodies reached toward the Justice League with frozen hands, their mouths open in eternal screams, their eyes glazed with the knowledge of exactly what had been done to them. Lillian averted her gaze, but Superman forced himself to look, to bear witness, to remember what was at stake if they failed. The Slayer brought them to a massive laboratory where the rupture's energy was most concentrated. Here, the dimensional barrier was so thin it was effectively non-existent, both realities occupying the same space simultaneously, creating optical distortions that hurt to perceive. Equipment floated in contradiction of gravity, sometimes falling upward, sometimes sideways, as competing physical laws struggled for dominance. In the chamber's center stood what looked like a massive argent accumulator, but its design was wrong, too organic, too deliberately crafted to resemble something between a technological device and a living thing. "That's not UAC standard equipment," Lillian said, her archivist's expertise immediately recognizing the aberration. "Someone built this specifically to interface with the dimensional rupture. This wasn't an accident, this was engineered." Batman's cowl enhanced his vision, allowing him to perceive layers of technological complexity that would have been invisible to normal sight. She's right. This is a harvesting device. It's designed to extract energy from the dimensional friction and convert it into usable power. His voice hardened with controlled anger. Someone is deliberately keeping the rupture open because it's profitable. The Slayer's hands moved across his armor's interface, and new data appeared in the holographic display. Files marked with UAC classification codes so high that Lillian's clearance didn't even acknowledge their existence. Project Chimera. Director's eyes only. Authorized by Samuel Hayden personally before his transformation and subsequent disappearance. The project's goal was ambitious to the point of insanity. Use controlled dimensional incursions to harvest energy from foreign universes, converting their fundamental forces into argent power to feed humanity's expansion. They were shopping for realities to drain, Green Lantern said, his voice hollow with the implications, like resource extraction but on a cosmic scale. They punched through into our universe, not by accident, but by design. And now both universes are paying the price. Wonder Woman finished, her hand tightening on her sword's grip. How do we shut it down? The Slayer pointed to the accumulator, then made a fist and mimed punching. His message was clear enough. Destroy the device. Collapse the controlled harvesting process. Force the rupture to close through removal of the artificial anchors keeping it stable. Simple, direct, and likely catastrophically dangerous given the amount of energy currently flowing through the system. Cyborg interfaced with the accumulator's control systems, his consciousness diving into networks that were marginally less corrupted than the facility's main infrastructure. It's going to create a massive backlash when it fails. All the harvested energy will discharge simultaneously. We're talking about the combined fundamental forces of two universes releasing in a single burst. The explosion will vaporize everything within a kilometer radius. Then we need to channel it, Superman said, his tactical mind engaging despite the exhaustion dragging at his limbs. Direct the energy back through the rupture into our universe. Let it dissipate across dimensional barriers rather than detonating in a single point. That requires someone to maintain the channel during the discharge, Batman pointed out. Someone capable of withstanding energies that will make a solar core seem like a candle flame. Someone who can stand in the center of that detonation and hold the door open long enough for the bleed-off to complete. All eyes turned to Superman. He was the obvious choice, the most durable, the one most likely to survive sustained exposure to physics-violating energy. But Clark Kent's eyes were fixed on the Slayer, seeing something the others might have missed. The way the Slayer stood, the set of his shoulders, the weapon selection he had already begun making. "You're planning to do it yourself," Clark said, not quite a question. "You've done something like this before." The Slayer's helmet dipped once acknowledgement without explanation. His hands continued their work, producing devices from dimensional storage that looked like focused argent emitters. He began placing them in geometric patterns around the accumulator, creating what Batman's tactical analysis identified as an amplification array designed to concentrate and direct the energy discharge. "You'll die," Diana said simply, her warrior's pragmatism cutting through any pretense. "Even with that armor, nothing survives that level of exposure." The Slayer paused in his preparations and turned to face her. For a moment, his hand rose to his helmet's seal. With a hiss of depressurizing atmosphere, he removed the helmet, revealing the face beneath. The Justice League had encountered beings from across the multiverse, gods, demons, cosmic entities whose faces defied description. But the Slayer's face was simply human, lined with scars and age, bearing the weight of incalculable loss. His eyes held no madness, no berserk fury, only a profound, infinite weariness that came from fighting too long, from sacrificing too much, from existing as nothing more than a weapon pointed at hell for eons beyond counting. He was tired in ways that transcended physical exhaustion, tired in his soul, tired in the fundamental essence of whatever remained of his humanity. But beneath the weariness burned something else, absolute, unbreakable resolve. He would see this through because that was what he did. He killed demons and saved humanity. even when humanity wasn't his own, even when the cost was everything he had left, because in the end, that was all he was. All he had ever been. All he could be, until death finally granted him the mercy he had long since stopped seeking. "There has to be another way," Clark said, his hope-fueled determination refusing to accept the sacrifice of someone who had already given more than any being should be asked to give. "We're the Justice League. We solve impossible problems. Let us help you." The Slayer, no longer anonymous behind his helmet, now revealed as simply a man who had made terrible choices and lived with worse consequences, shook his head. He gestured toward the Justice League, then toward the Rupture, his meaning clear. Their presence here was the problem. Their metaphysical incompatibility with this dimension what was driving the cascade toward apocalypse. The longer they remained, the worse it became. They needed to leave, to return to their universe where the fundamental forces recognized them as native rather than invasive. "We're not leaving you to die alone," the Flash said, and there was steel in Barry Allen's voice that suggested he would vibrate through solid matter before allowing that outcome. The Slayer's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened fractionally, perhaps recognition of the sentiment, perhaps mere acknowledgement that they meant well even if their understanding was incomplete. He reached into his armor and produced something small, metallic, ornate with craftsmanship that predated human civilization. A token-bearing script in a language none of them recognized, but which radiated a sense of sacrifice and duty that transcended translation. He pressed it into Superman's hand, closing the Kryptonian's fingers around it with surprising gentleness. The message was clear enough. Remember this. Remember what was done here. Remember that sometimes salvation requires someone to stand in the fire so others can live. Take this understanding back to your universe and use it to be better than we were. Alarms throughout the facility suddenly escalated to a new pitch of urgency. The accumulator's containment was failing faster than projected, the dimensional friction increasing as both universes began to actively reject each other with mounting violence. Cracks appeared in the laboratory walls, not physical fractures, but tears in reality itself, gaps where the dimensional boundary had worn so thin that nothingness showed through. Through the rupture, new demons began emerging, not the standard infantry of Hell's armies, but specialized entities clearly dispatched to investigate why the harvesting operation had stopped generating power. These were archviles, their robes marked with the sigils of Hell's techno-theological elite, their skeletal hands capable of resurrecting fallen demons and reanimating them as more powerful variants. Behind them came Hell Knights in full tactical formations, supported by cacodemons, whose floating mass suggested gravitational manipulation beyond what normal demonic physiology should allow. The Slayer replaced his helmet with practiced efficiency and unslung his plasma rifle, its barrel already glowing with pre-charged energy. He pointed toward a sealed door on the laboratory's far side, the emergency evacuation tunnel that would lead the Justice League back toward the surface, toward the facility's teleportation arrays that could potentially be reconfigured to punch through the dimensional barrier and send them home. His other hand held up 5 fingers, then closed into a fist. 5 minutes. That was how long he estimated he could hold the demons back while they escaped, and he completed the preparations for the accumulator's catastrophic overload. Batman immediately began calculating routes, his cowl's processors mapping the facility's layout and identifying the optimal path to the teleportation arrays. "We move fast. No stopping, no fighting, unless absolutely necessary. Our powers are destabilizing this dimension. Every second we remain increases the risk of total collapse." The demons crashed through the laboratory's main entrance with overwhelming force, their numbers suggesting Hell had committed serious resources to preserving its energy harvesting operation. The Slayer moved to intercept, becoming a whirlwind of precisely orchestrated violence. His plasma rifle fired in controlled bursts, each shot calculated to eliminate priority targets, the Archviles first, removing their resurrection capabilities before they could complicate battlefield mathematics. Skeletal forms exploded into plasma-burned ash, their death screams echoing through frequencies that made reality shudder. The Justice League ran. It went against every instinct they had cultivated across years of heroism, every principle they had committed to upholding. Heroes didn't abandon allies to face overwhelming odds alone. Heroes stood their ground. Heroes found another way. But Superman's hand closed around the token the Slayer had given him, and he understood with terrible clarity that sometimes the heroic choice was accepting someone else's sacrifice rather than diminishing it through futile attempts to prevent the inevitable. They reached the evacuation tunnel as explosions from the laboratory suggested the Slayer had escalated to heavy ordnance. The facility shook with impacts that rattled bones and threatened to collapse entire structural sections. Lillian led the way, her archivist's familiarity with the facility's layout allowing her to navigate corridors that had been damaged beyond easy recognition. Behind them, the sounds of combat continued: endless gunfire, screaming demons, the occasional roar of a chainsaw that meant the fighting had transitioned to close quarters. Then silence. Sudden and complete, as though someone had activated a universal mute function. The Justice League froze. That terrible quiet, more frightening than any amount of demonic howling. Superman's enhanced hearing strained to detect any sound from the laboratory, but something was interfering: localized dimensional distortions that bent sound waves into nonsensical patterns. "Keep moving," Wonder Woman commanded, recognizing the danger of hesitation. "We honor his sacrifice by completing the mission, not by dying in the same explosion." They emerged into the facility's upper levels where the teleportation arrays waited: massive platforms surrounded by argent accumulators and dimensional anchoring equipment that looked barely functional after the facility's sustained abuse. Cyborg immediately began interfacing with the control systems, his technological consciousness fighting through layers of corrupted code to access the fundamental transport protocols. "This isn't designed for biological matter," he reported, his voice tight with concentration. "The UAC used this for cargo and resource transfer, not personnel. The decontamination protocols will try to strip away anything organic, treating it as demonic contamination. I can bypass it, but it's going to hurt." "Do it," Superman ordered, watching the countdown on his suit's chronometer. 3 minutes had elapsed. The Slayer had bought them time with his blood, and they would not waste it debating minor discomfort. Cyborg's fingers flew across holographic interfaces, rewriting transport parameters on the fly, forcing the system to accept biological signatures without triggering sterilization protocols. The accumulators around the platform began to hum, their pitch climbing toward frequencies that suggested reality was preparing to fold in on itself. The dimensional coordinates locked onto the rupture's signature, using it as a beacon to guide the transport back through the barriers between universes. 30 seconds to transport capability, Cyborg announced. "Everyone onto the platform. This is a one-shot deal. If we miss the window, we're stranded." The Justice League assembled on the platform, their bodies exhausted, their powers drained, their confidence shaken by their encounter with a universe that had proven their might meaningless. Lillian Voss stood with them. Her choice made remaining in the facility meant death, and her knowledge of what had occurred here was too valuable to lose. She clutched data storage devices containing every sensor reading, every incident report, every scrap of documentation that might help prevent similar disasters. The facility shook with a detonation that felt less like an explosion and more like reality having a seizure. The accumulator in the laboratory had reached critical overload. The Slayer had completed his preparations and initiated the discharge sequence, accepting the role of lightning rod for energies that would crack planets like eggs. Through the rupture's light, they saw him one final time, a silhouette standing at the center of catastrophic radiance, his armor glowing white-hot as it absorbed thermal death that should have vaporized him instantly. His arms were spread wide, holding objects that must have been the argent emitters he had placed earlier, using them to direct the energy discharge back through the rupture rather than allowing it to detonate omnidirectionally. The explosion built like a wave approaching shore, gathering power from the entire facility's accumulated argent reserves, from the dimensional friction between realities, from the very fabric of space-time being ripped apart and forced to release its binding energy. Superman wanted to look away, to spare himself the sight of someone giving everything so others could live. But he forced himself to watch, to bear witness, to remember. The Slayer stood until the last possible moment, holding the channel open as universe-killing energies poured through him. Then the detonation reached its crescendo, and everything was light. The teleportation system engaged, yanking the Justice League through dimensional barriers with enough force to make molecular bonds question their commitment to coherence. They existed for a subjective eternity in the space between realities, experiencing the nauseating sensation of having their fundamental nature rewritten as they transitioned from incompatible dimension back to their native universe. The DC cosmos welcomed them home, its metaphysics embracing them like children lost and found, restoring their powers to proper functionality, healing the dimensional discord that had left them weakened and vulnerable. They materialized in the Justice League watchtower, tumbling onto the teleportation platform in an undignified heap of exhausted heroes and one terrified archivist. Alarms immediately began blaring as the watchtower's systems detected the dimensional contamination they had carried with them, trace amounts of Argent energy, fragments of Hell's corruption, metaphysical fingerprints that suggested their atoms remembered being somewhere they should never have been. Superman rose slowly, his body aching but functional, his powers already restoring themselves to full strength as his cells drank in solar radiation from home reality sunlight. He opened his hand and looked at the token the Slayer had given him, a small piece of worked metal bearing symbols that might have been prayer, might have been condemnation, might have been both, a memorial to every warrior who had ever stood in the fire so others could live. "What do we do now?" the Flash asked, his voice subdued in a way Barry Allen's voice rarely was. "Do we go back for him? Do we search for a way to retrieve him?" Batman had already moved to the Watchtower's analytical systems, downloading data from Cyborg's recordings of their time in the Doom dimension. "We learn," he said quietly. "We analyze what happened, understand what we faced, and prepare for the possibility that it could happen again. And we remember that there are wars being fought across the multiverse that we know nothing about, by heroes we've never met, against horrors we can't imagine." Wonder Diana stood at the viewport, looking out at Earth turning peacefully in the void, innocent and unaware of how close it had come to being consumed by dimensional collapse. "He saved us," she said, "saved our universe, and we don't even know his name." Lillian Voss, still trembling from shock and exhaustion, spoke quietly from where she sat on the platform's edge. "The Doom Slayer, that's what the UAC files called him, but the demons had other names. The Unchained Predator, the Hellwalker, the Slayer of Kings. He's been fighting them for longer than most civilizations exist, fighting alone because everyone else is either dead or corrupted." She looked up at the assembled heroes. He didn't expect to be thanked, didn't want acknowledgement. He just saw something that needed killing and killed it, because that's what he does. That's all he does. Green Lantern's ring pulsed weakly, its charge depleted by the dimensional stress but slowly recovering. "We owe him a debt that can never be repaid. Then we pay it forward," Superman said, his voice carrying the moral certainty that had guided him through countless crises. "We honor his sacrifice by being better, by fighting harder, by making sure that when the next impossible threat emerges, we're ready. We remember that sometimes heroism looks like standing alone in the fire." Cyborg finished his system diagnostics and looked up with an expression of mixed relief and horror. "I'm reading residual dimensional signatures. The rupture is sealed, but there are echoes, places where the barriers between our reality and theirs got worn too thin. It's stable for now, but if something happens, if Hell ever decides to intentionally breach through rather than accidentally intersecting with us, we might have less warning than we'd like." "Then we monitor," Batman said, already formulating contingency plans, already thinking 3 steps ahead toward threats that might emerge from dimensional shadows. "We watch for signs of incursion, we develop countermeasures based on what we learned. And if Hell ever tries to invade our universe, they'll find the Justice League waiting." The Watchtower's communication systems suddenly lit up with incoming transmissions from across the planet. The dimensional rupture had been visible from Earth, not its full nature, but enough that humanity's instruments had registered anomalies that demanded explanation. News networks were already speculating about cosmic events. Governments were demanding answers. The Justice League would need to provide statements, offer reassurances, manage panic without revealing the full terrifying truth of what had almost occurred. But before dealing with politics and public relations, they stood together in silence, 7 heroes and 1 witness, united in remembrance of someone who had fought alone for eons and made his final stand so that people he had never met could continue existing. The token Superman held seemed to pulse with faint warmth, as though carrying within its metal the echo of the Slayer's absolute conviction, his unbreakable resolve, his terrible, endless duty. In that moment, the Justice League understood something fundamental about the nature of heroism across the multiverse. Power meant nothing without purpose. Strength was meaningless without direction. What mattered was the choice to stand when standing was impossible, to fight when fighting was futile, to sacrifice when sacrifice was the only option that led to anything resembling victory. Somewhere in the ruins of the UAC facility, or perhaps in dimensions beyond counting, or perhaps in whatever passed for an afterlife in the Doom universe's brutal cosmology, the Doom Slayer had finally earned his rest. And if the cosmos had any justice at all, any mercy remaining in its infinite, uncaring expanse, he would find peace in whatever came next. But somehow, Superman suspected that even in death, even in whatever realm awaited warriors who had given everything, the Slayer would find demons that needed killing, innocents who needed protecting, and an eternal war that needed fighting. Because that was what he was. That was what he had chosen to become. And some choices were so fundamental they transcended existence itself. 3 weeks later, the repairs to the watchtower were complete, though trace amounts of argent contamination remained embedded in the molecular structure of the teleportation systems, permanent reminders of their journey through hell. Batman had spent 72 hours analyzing every second of recorded data, building threat profiles for demonic entities, developing contingencies for dimensional breaches that would hopefully never be needed, but which demanded preparation nonetheless. Lillian Voss had been granted asylum on Earth, her knowledge of UAC operations and dimensional physics too valuable to waste, her return to the Doom universe too dangerous to risk. She worked now with Star Labs, helping humanity develop early warning systems for dimensional instabilities, teaching scientists about Argent Energy's properties and the terrible costs of attempting to harvest power from hell itself. She still had nightmares, visions of demons, memories of watching her universe consumed by its own ambitions, survivor's guilt that she had escaped while countless others remained trapped in eternal torment. The Justice League returned to their regular operations, stopping alien invasions, preventing apocalyptic threats, saving humanity from itself and from cosmic forces that treated Earth as either prize or obstacle. But something had changed. They fought with greater awareness of their own limitations, with humbled understanding that raw power meant nothing against foes who operated outside the rules they took for granted. They trained harder, studied more thoroughly, prepared for possibilities they had previously dismissed as impossible, and sometimes, in the quiet moments between crises, they wondered about the Slayer, whether he had survived against all odds, whether his armor's impossible durability had protected him through energies that should have annihilated existence itself, whether he was still out there somewhere, still fighting, still hunting demons through dimensions they couldn't imagine. The answer came unexpectedly, during an investigation into anomalous energy readings in the Mariana Trench. Aquaman had detected something down there in the crushing depths, an object that radiated dimensional signatures eerily similar to what they had encountered in the Doom universe. The Justice League assembled to investigate, more curious than concerned, expecting perhaps a fragment of debris that had passed through the rupture before it sealed. What they found was a monument, carved from a single piece of material that resisted identification. Neither stone nor metal nor anything their instruments could classify it stood 20 meters tall on the ocean floor, surrounded by abyssal darkness. Its surface was covered in script that matched the token Superman still carried, words in a dead language that somehow conveyed meaning despite linguistic barriers. The translation emerged not through conventional understanding but through emotional resonance, the words imprinting directly onto their consciousness through means that suggested divine or infernal origin. Here stood the Doomslayer, who knew only one purpose, who possessed only one truth, who accomplished only one deed, yet that deed was enough. He stood in the fire so others could live. He bore the weight so others could be free. He walked through hell so others could know heaven. Let it be known across all realities, all dimensions, all possible futures, he was enough. When demons came, he killed them. When hell invaded, he pushed it back. When corruption spread, he burned it away. He asked for nothing. He expected nothing. He regretted nothing. Remember his sacrifice. Honor his choice. Walk his path if you have the strength. But more importantly, be the reason someone doesn't have to. The monument was neither tribute nor memorial, but something stranger, a warning and a promise, a declaration of principle carved in material that would outlast civilizations. Superman ran his hand across the script, feeling the indentations that had been created through application of force rather than carving tools. Someone or something had pressed their fingers into the material while it was cooling from molten state, burning the words into existence through contact that should have vaporized flesh and bone. "He's alive," Wonder Woman said quietly, her warrior's instincts recognizing the signs. "This wasn't placed by mourners. This is a message from him to anyone who might follow the same path he walked." "But how?" Green Lantern asked, his analytical mind struggling with the impossibility. "We saw the explosion. Nothing could have survived that." Batman pulled up the energy readings his cowl had recorded during their final moments in the Doom dimension. He manipulated the data, filtering out background radiation, isolating specific signatures. There, in the microseconds before the teleportation engaged, buried beneath universe-killing radiance, a single energy spike that suggested a secondary teleportation event. Someone or something had yanked the Slayer away at the last possible instant, removing him from ground zero immediately before the detonation reached its peak. "He had help," Bruce said slowly, pieces clicking into place. Someone intervened, someone with the power and motivation to save him, even when he had committed to dying. Cyborg accessed archived files Lillian had provided, searching through UAC theological documents that discussed entities operating at power levels beyond even Hell's hierarchy. He found references to seraphim beings who existed before creation, who possessed the authority to reshape reality, according to principles that transcended demonic or divine limitations. One seraphim in particular appeared repeatedly in the Slayer's history. The one who had blessed his armor, who had empowered him beyond mortal limitations, who had apparently appointed him as the universe's immune response against Hell's cancer. "The seraphim saved him," Victor said, conviction building as he cross-referenced documents. "They yanked him out at the last second, probably stored him in some kind of dimensional stasis until the explosion dissipated, then dropped him back into his universe to continue his mission." "Can we contact him?" the Flash asked. "Send a message, offer assistance, let him know he's not alone." Superman studied the monument, reading the emotional weight beneath its words. "I don't think he wants that. This isn't a call for help or a request for backup. This is a passing of wisdom. He's telling us that we need to be strong enough that our people never have to face what he faced. That we need to protect our universe so thoroughly that no one else has to become what he became." Aquaman's connection to the ocean allowed him to sense something else, a subtle vibration in the water, a harmonic resonance that suggested the monument was more than simple carved stone. It was a beacon, a dimensional marker, a signpost visible across realities to anyone with the right perceptual equipment. The message wasn't just for the Justice League, it was for any hero, any warrior, any guardian who might find themselves fighting alone against impossible odds. You are not the first. You will not be the last. The fight continues. Stand. They remained there for a long time, 7 gods standing at the bottom of the ocean, paying respects to a warrior they barely knew but would never forget. Eventually they returned to the surface, to the light, to the world they had sworn to protect. But the monument remained, permanent testimony to what one person could accomplish through absolute conviction, through unbreakable resolve, through willingness to pay any cost to save those who couldn't save themselves. 6 months later, apocalyptic threats emerged and were defeated. Alien invasions were repelled. Supervillains made their moves and were thwarted. The Justice League continued their endless work, their eternal vigilance, their commitment to protecting humanity from cosmic forces that viewed Earth as either target or insignificant obstacle to greater ambitions. But they remembered, and remembering changed them. Superman found himself less willing to compromise on principles, more willing to make hard choices when hard choices were necessary. The Slayer had shown him that sometimes being the ultimate force meant accepting ultimate responsibility, that power demanded purpose beyond simply being powerful. He still believed in hope, still fought for truth and justice, but he understood now that sometimes justice looked like standing alone in the fire. Wonder Woman incorporated the Slayer's philosophy into her warrior training, teaching the next generation of Amazons that strength without purpose was merely violence, that power demanded sacrifice, that protection sometimes required walking through hell so others didn't have to. Diana's students learned that heroism was not about glory or recognition, but about making the choice to stand when no one else could, to bear the weight so others could be free. The Flash pushed himself to be faster, to learn more applications of the Speed Force, driven by the memory of a warrior who had fought for eons without respite and never faltered. Barry Allen understood now that speed was responsibility. The faster he moved, the more people he could save, the more threats he could stop before they escalated. He would never be as singularly focused as the Slayer, but he could honor that focus by maximizing every second of every day. Batman's contingency planning reached new levels of thoroughness. If dimensional incursions were possible, if hell existed across the multiverse, if corruption could spread from universe to universe, then humanity needed protections Bruce Wayne had never considered necessary. He developed protocols for identifying early signs of demonic contamination. He created weapons designed to operate against entities that violated conventional physics. He prepared because the Slayer had shown him what happened when preparation wasn't enough, when good intentions met cosmic indifference and discovered they were meaningless. Green Lantern redoubled his commitment to the core, recognizing that willpower alone wasn't sufficient against foes who could corrupt emotional spectrum energy itself. Hal Jordan began training with weapons beyond his ring, learning combat techniques that didn't depend on constructs, developing backup plans for scenarios where his greatest asset became his greatest vulnerability. The Slayer had fought with whatever tools were available, never depending on a single source of power, and that flexibility had kept him alive when beings far more powerful had fallen. Cyborg upgraded his systems with redundancies and firewalls designed to resist the kind of corruption he had encountered in the Doom Dimension's networks. Victor Stone understood now that his technological nature made him vulnerable to threats that purely biological beings could resist, that his hybrid existence was both advantage and liability depending on the battlefield. He needed to be ready for enemies who fought on digital and spiritual fronts simultaneously, who could turn his greatest strengths into vectors for attack. Aquaman returned to Atlantis and began teaching his people about dimensional threats, preparing them for possibilities they had never considered. The oceans covered most of Earth's surface, and if dimensional breaches could occur anywhere, Atlantic preparedness became not just royal duty but species survival. Arthur Curry commissioned exploratory teams to investigate deep trenches where reality might be thin, where dimensional barriers might be weak, where hell might attempt to breach through if it ever decided their universe was worth invading. And Lillian Voss worked with Star Labs to develop early warning systems, to create detection networks that would alert humanity to dimensional instabilities before they cascaded into catastrophic breaches. Her nightmares gradually decreased in frequency, replaced by determination that her knowledge would prevent others from suffering what she had witnessed. She had seen the cost of dimensional arrogance, of treating the multiverse as a resource to be exploited, and she would spend the rest of her life ensuring humanity learned from the UAC's mistakes. The token Superman had received remained in the Watchtower's trophy room, displayed with honors typically reserved for weapons wielded by legendary heroes or artifacts recovered from world-ending threats. But it was neither weapon nor artifact. It was reminder, declaration, promise. A small piece of metal bearing the weight of infinite conviction, serving as permanent testament to what one person could accomplish when they refused to compromise, to surrender, to accept defeat. Sometimes late at night, when the Watchtower was quiet and the earth turned peacefully below, Superman would stand before the token and wonder if the Slayer was still out there, still fighting, still walking through hell with the same implacable determination, wonder if he had found peace, if he had discovered purpose beyond eternal war, if he had somehow broken free from the cycle of violence that had consumed his existence. But mostly, Superman hoped that somewhere across the multiverse, in dimensions beyond imagining, the Doom Slayer continued his work. Because if he could stand alone against hell and prevail, if he could fight for eons without breaking, if he could sacrifice everything and still maintain his purpose, then there was hope for all of them. Hope that no darkness was too deep to fight through, that no corruption was too complete to resist, that no evil was too powerful to eventually overcome. The Justice League would continue their work, protecting their universe with renewed understanding of what protection truly meant. They had witnessed heroism in its purest, most brutal form, had seen what happened when someone gave absolutely everything for people they would never meet, for a world they would never walk, for a future they would never see. And if hell ever came to their universe, if demons ever breached through dimensional barriers with intent to corrupt and consume their reality, they would be ready. They had learned from the Slayer. They had been taught by his example. They understood now what it meant to stand in the fire, to bear the weight, to walk through hell so others could know heaven. They would be enough, because they had seen what enough looked like, and they would honor his sacrifice by never forgetting, by always preparing, by being ready to make the same choice if their universe ever demanded it. Somewhere in the deep cosmos, across dimensional barriers that separated reality from reality, in the ruins of a facility that had tried to harvest the multiverse itself, a monument stood, its message carved in material that would outlast stars, its words resonating across frequencies that transcended language, its meaning clear to anyone with the courage to read it. Stand in the fire, bear the weight, walk through hell, be enough. The DC universe had come into Doom, and Doom had shown them what heroism looked like when stripped of everything except absolute conviction and unbreakable purpose. They had been tested, had been found wanting, had been saved by someone who asked nothing in return except that they remember, that they honor his choice, that they be better, and they would be. They had to be, because the Slayer had shown them that the only unacceptable outcome was giving up, surrendering, allowing corruption to spread unchecked because fighting was difficult or sacrifice was costly. He had paid the price so they could learn the lesson, and they would never forget what that price had purchased. In the end, two universes had collided. One had learned what it meant to truly protect. The other had continued its eternal war, its endless vigil, its absolute refusal to ever stop fighting until existence itself ceased. Both were forever changed. Both would remember. And when the next dimensional crisis emerged, when the next cosmic threat attempted to breach through reality's defenses, when the next impossible situation demanded impossible heroes, the Justice League would be ready. Because they had met the Doomslayer, and meeting him had shown them what heroes could become when they refused to accept any limitation, any compromise, any outcome except complete and total victory, no matter the cost. They would stand in the fire. They would bear the weight. They would walk through hell if that was what protecting their universe required. Because that was what heroes did. Not because it was glorious or rewarding or recognized, but because it was necessary. Because someone had to. Because if not them, then who? The Slayer had answered that question with his entire existence. If not me, then no one. And having answered, he had stood. And having stood, he had fought. And having fought, he had won. Now it was their turn.